Universal Casualty, Super Q,
los Miami Dolphins y tú, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Son los Dolphins, nuestros Miami Dolphins, el team número 1 en toda la nación. Y son ellos orgullo de Miami y de todos los latinos en la capital del sol. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Este año no me hablen de los Redskins, no me hablen de los Chargers, ni de los Dallas Cowboys, porque los Dolphins son número 1 y lo demostrarán al llegar al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Nuestra línea está mejor que nunca y nuestra defensiva fue siempre la mejor. Y es por eso que yo no tengo duda que los Miami Dolphins ganarán el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl.
Universal Casualty
Y Super Q, los primeros. Bueno, caballeros, todo el mundo que cante con nosotros. Dame una D, dame una O, dame una L, dame una P, una H, una I, una N, una S. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos? Miami Dolphins. Me voy para el Super Bowl. 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 Me voy para el Super Bowl.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team that's in our hearts. We've got love that won't depart.
Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
Hey, can I call gimmick infringement on Kevin Dern? Because our buddy Kevin, on the last episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly, introduced Evan and asked Evan to say hello to the people. It's an outrage. It's an outrage.
Well, what did Evan say?
He did not say hello to the people.
Oh.
So
well.
Evan respects the gimmick, but Kevin, I got to have a chat. I got to have a chat with my buddy Kevin Dern.
Well, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I've heard.
Oh, well, I've heard that as well. So maybe I won't be so offended. Maybe I'll tone down the outrage. But I mean, this is the internet. This is what people do. We get outraged at anything and everything.
That's true.
And
we're getting outraged at third and fourth string centers making bad snaps.
It's an outrage. It's an outrage that every single one of the centers can't snap the ball correctly in training camp for the Miami Dolphins. It's an outrage that the Houston Texans and Chicago Bears are playing the Hall of Fame game as we go live. The nerve of those people to play football when we're trying to do a show live on the internet.
Caleb Williams.
Yeah, well, he's not playing. Davis Mills is playing football today.
Oh.
Anyway, regardless, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show. We're glad you're with us. It's the preseason. We're getting a little punchy. We're getting a little excited. It's that time of year where you're starting to get real antsy. Training camp is that time because it's getting closer. You're getting ready for football season, but it's not quite there yet. The preseason games only exacerbate the issue, in my experience. Like I get even more frustrated because now I'm picking apart, like today, let's just get into it. Today, we're going to talk about, the news that has developed out of training camp so far. And I think all things being equal, for the most part, there's not that much news to come out of training camp thus far. And that is, I think, overwhelmingly a good thing. Knock on wood, aggressively. Like, you got the Tua contract out of the way, whether you agree with the contract, you don't like the contract, you think it's a good contract, whatever the case may be, the contract is done. And that was the big elephant in the room. So now that's out of the way. While there, yes, are other contracts to sign, maybe you renegotiate Tyreek Hill, you restructure him, you got to deal with, Javon Holland down the line. Those are not pressing issues that need to be resolved right now. You got Tua, you got that out of the way. And so now it's just a matter of, let's hope that everybody can stay healthy and let's get to the regular season and let's get to work. And, right now the big injury issue seems to be Cam Smith. And we'll talk a little bit about Cam Smith and what that means. But for the most part, there's not that big of news. I guess before we get into all of the individual little things, Brain, in camp, shout out to everybody watching on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. Smash that like button if you would. Thank you very much. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Shout out to everybody watching on the I Am a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page. We're glad to have you with us here today. And a reminder, if you're not doing so already, to make sure you download, review, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphin Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you get your podcasts. We appreciate it very, very much. Brain, before we get into the minutia of training camp, let's talk about this Tua deal. We talked about it last time. It was basically the big thing that we talked about, but we've now gotten some details on the contract, and without getting into the minutia of all of what the contract entails, what was your biggest takeaway upon learning about the structure of the Tua deal? I think I know what it is, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Biggest takeaway is the way the cash is distributed, with almost $150 million in the first 3 years. And then also that roster bonus at $25 million sitting there in the second year. So it gives the Dolphins, as long as Tua does not flame out and have like an absolutely horrible regression or a terrible injury in the first year in this season, then they're probably going to, restructure the majority of his bonus money in the second year to get a very small cap hit in the second year of that deal. And so after 2 years of this deal, so I mean, technically after the first year of the extension, after 2025 going into 2026, the Dolphins are going to be sitting in a position where they're going to have a pretty good idea of whether they're going to want to restructure the deal again to lower cap space in 2026 to kick out more money to the back end of this more guaranteed money, I should say, to the back end of this contract and end up with more of a long-term commitment to Tua, or they're going to have a very clear off ramp in the 2026 season where they can get out of it. But at the same time, Tua, after that 2026 season, if he lives up to the contract and he plays extremely well, there's no way that he's going to play on the last 2 years of that deal as it's currently situated, where he's going to take massive pay cuts the rest of the way. So it's really essentially a 3-year, $150 million deal. So in the first 3 years of this deal, Tua's getting more cash in the first 3 years of his deal than any of those other big name guys that signed. It's just not as much of a long-term commitment. So I think it's actually a great deal for both sides.
Yep, absolutely. That was the whole thing going in, was that the Dolphins were going to want to give themselves some flexibility and an ability to not be bogged down for years and years and years to come with Tua if something were to happen on the injury side, or if he were just to flame out, like you said. So I think from that respect, it's a good deal for both sides. And the other thing that you hear is that in a couple of years, it's really going to look like a bargain, because, as the cap continues to go up and as more contracts come in, the deal's going to look even better in hindsight than it does now. And especially if Tua follows up the performance that he had last year with an even better performance in the years to come. And early reports indicate at a training camp that after that deal was signed, Mr. Tagovailoa has shown up in training camp and looked really, really good, which is encouraging to hear. So that's the kind of thing that you like to hear. Elsewhere in camp, again, like I said, not a lot of big news to development, not a lot of huge developments. Brain, what is probably, short of the Tua Tagovailoa deal, what is the biggest story for you coming out of camp so far? Is it the emergence of Chop Robinson? Is it the return to form for Kader Kohu? Is it the reported excellence of Ethan Bonner? Like, what's the big story for you at a camp early on?
Those are all good stories, but I got to tell you, we spent a lot of time this offseason, ever since the draft and then the signing of Odell Beckham Jr., talking about the competitiveness of the wide receiver room and how we probably have a battle for 4 guys battling it out for 3 spots. And the guy who has taken the early lead in that competition, especially with Odell Beckham being out and ample opportunities to be had, is River Craycraft. And I love it because River Craycraft has forever been the guy that's been overlooked in this competition seemingly every year. And then every year, he just flat out makes an impact. He does the dirty work. He runs the routes. There's nothing spectacular about him. He's obviously got a capped ceiling from an athleticism perspective, but the guy just gets the job done. And from multiple reports, outside of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, he's been the Dolphins' 3rd best receiver at camp. So early, very early, but I would say he's got an inside track to make the roster. early on.
Of course, I think it's also worth noting that River Craycraft is now competing with Willie Snead.
Right. Well, I think you need camp bodies in there. I would be very surprised if Willie Snead ultimately made the team, but he is a veteran. You know, he's got a lot of experience, so it's not like, you know, I wouldn't say he's the longest shot of the guys in the wide receiver room.
No, but I don't think it's likely that Willie Snead makes this team.
Probably.
What about? I had a hot take earlier, like right before training camp, and one of my hot takes was I think Braxton Berrios doesn't make the team. You think there's any chance in hell that happens?
Well, River Craycraft is the pathway for that not happening, because ultimately, you know, you've got 4 guys that are making this roster. You've got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Odell Beckham, who you just signed. And then you've got Malik Washington. Granted, he was a 5th-round pick, and so a 5th-round pick is not really a lock to make the roster, but given his ability, and it is a draft pick, it's not like it was like a 6th or 7th-round pick. I don't think he's going to be a guy that you can stash on the practice squad. I'm fairly certain he's going to make this roster as well. I don't think they're going to keep more than 6 wide receivers on the roster. So now you're down to Eric Ezukanma and River Craycraft and Braxton Berrios. And then, you know, the other guys that are the more long shots. Obviously, the news came out, Taj Washington, he's likely going to be out for the year.
He's out for the year. He is out for the year, officially.
Yeah.
Put him on IR in the preseason. He's done.
Yeah. Well, I thought they put him on the reserved PUP list, which is not technically IR. But I think
he got moved to IR.
Oh, he got moved to IR. Okay. Yeah. So he's done. So I really think that it's Ezukanma, Craycraft, and Braxton Berrios going for 2 spots. And I think Eric Ezukanma, because he was drafted, and, you know, the Dolphins still granted, we're 2 years removed from it. You're getting to the point where you don't necessarily have to keep him on the roster. I also think he brings a different body to the room than Craycraft and Berrios. And so if it comes down to it, I think Ezukanma is going to end up making this roster, provided he's healthy. And then it's really River Craycraft and Braxton Berrios battling it out for that last spot, unless one of these other guys, you know, surprises, you know, maybe an Anthony Schwartz or somebody, and somebody really pops on special teams, you know, here over the next couple of weeks. I really think it's Craycraft and Berrios battling it out for 1 spot. And Berrios has an inside track based on the financial commitment
and the special teams.
But ultimately, I think they've got other guys that can return kicks.
That's true. And Devon Achane is one of those guys.
Yeah. And Javon Holland is one of those guys. And Jalen Waddle is one of those guys. And I mean, do they want to put somebody with the financial investments into returning punts? That's kind of another question. But Malik Washington might be one of these guys. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because that seems to be where Berrios has an inside track. But frankly, if River Craycraft is just balling out, can you afford to put River Craycraft on the practice squad? Is somebody going to pick up River Craycraft? Because you got away with it the last 2 years. I don't know if you can get away with it for another year.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. What else? What else from training camp is still? Can we just talk about? I've heard some talk in training camp that Storm Duck has played well in this training camp. Now, I don't think Storm Duck is a realistic shot to make the roster. I think he would be a real long shot to make the 53-man unless he started really making some excellent plays on special teams and really just played out of his mind. Then he could make it perhaps like on a fringe roster spot. But I think he's the kind of guy that the Dolphins are looking to, maybe, if they like how he performs, keep him around practice squad. I just want to mention the Dolphins worked out several free agents, and one of them is a cornerback by the name of Rashad Wildgoose. So I just want to point out that there is a world where the Miami Dolphins could have Storm Duck and Rashad Wildgoose on the same team. And I think that's just tremendous. I would put them both on the 53-man just for the banter.
Yeah. A lot of quacking between the duck and the wild goose.
Yes. A lot of honking going on. I often hear there's a lot of honking going on at the Dolphins practices.
That's the news, is there's a whole lot of honking going on.
You got a wild goose, you got a storm duck, and then you also got a little something else going on. You know what it is.
Waddle.
That's right, baby.
I don't think we broke that out at all last year.
Oh, sure we did.
Did we?
We must have.
Well, talking about breakout or news. Granted, I mean, Jalen Waddle is established.
Waddle.
The news is that Jalen Waddle has been absolutely killing it at
Yes,
camp.
baby.
And with Tyreek Hill talking about, having more of a team approach, not focusing on, 2,000 yards and everything, more diversified offense. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to get a monster year from Jalen Waddle.
Well, dude got paid, so why not? Why not? Let's just run with it, bro. Let's go.
I'm really excited to see that. I think obviously the receiving core has been a story. I think if we want to stay on the offensive side of the ball, everybody wants to know about the offensive line.
Robert Jones.
I think that, look, obviously Isaiah Wynn's not practicing yet. Teron Armstead's not practicing yet. We're hearing about snap issues. Majority of oh my goodness. Nick Gator making an appearance.
Oh,
and if you're not watching on YouTube, our good friend Nick just entered the chat. Can the Dolphins get Jay Cutler back? I'll hang up and listen. And that's all we're going to say about that.
that's not a serious comment.
No, it's not a serious comment, but because it's Nick Gator and we love him.
Nick is a serious person.
And
that's not a serious comment.
He officiated my wedding, so I put it up on the screen.
Well, we appreciate that.
Where was I? Oh yeah, staying on the offensive line, or the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line. Isaiah Wynn's not practicing. Teron Armstead's not practicing.
Wrap those guys both up in bubble wrap until September 8th. No need to let those guys even break a sweat until the season starts.
Well, and that seems to be the plan. That seems to be the design. Somebody asked Mike McDaniel about it a couple days ago, and he basically said, look, when we signed him, that was part of the deal that we knew we were signing up for. They're going to take their time getting him ready to go. When he's ready, you'll know about it. So he doesn't seem very concerned about it. At this point, I would just assume he's going to be ready before the start of the season, and that's going to be your left guard. But the other guards, whether it's Robert Jones, Liam Eichenberg, Jack Driscoll, it's been very up and down, is the word out of camp.
Can we address this comment real quick from Casey Isaac on X, which you can find over at twitter.com?
Oh.
Asking if Connor Williams looking like a guy we can bring back. My understanding on Connor Williams is that his injury put him in pretty rough shape, and that this is a guy who's probably not going to be ready to play meaningful football until late in the season. What I do think, Casey, is that I think there is a real shot that Connor Williams is a kind of break glass in case of emergency signing that the Dolphins might go after late in the year. Might not even be an emergency. It might be a situation where like Connor Williams is working himself back to health and is ready to come play a little bit of meaningful football in hopes of trying to, getting on a short-term deal in order to hopefully parlay that into the big deal that he wanted to get. Remember, that was the whole thing, was that he was trying to get paid. but then that injury really messed up his plans. And so I think there's a chance that the Dolphins might be able to get him on the cheap and in like a sort of short-term rental role late in this season. And
I don't think so.
you know, and hopefully that's something that he can deliver on late in the year.
Yeah, I don't think so. As Mike in the chat mentions, Connor actually worked out for Seattle last week and another team. Word is that those meetings went well. A deal isn't imminent, which could, lend credence to the idea that maybe he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. But that said, I think the ship has sailed on Connor Williams. I think
who needs Connor Williams when you got Aaron Brewer fumbling snaps to Tua?
Well,
I know. It's a quarterback center working on the under center exchanges. It's not like snap issues going over to his head in the shotgun. It was a joke. Relax. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I think the Connor Williams train has left the building. I don't
shoot, baby.
Yeah. I don't think it's realistic. I suppose it's possible if you have an injury at center. I think ultimately what it was is that the Dolphins pivoted off of Connor Williams to bring back Aaron Brewer. And I think that they probably would bring back Connor Williams if he wanted to take a cheap deal, a cheap 1-year deal at guard. But I think Connor Williams is trying to get paid. And if you're trying to get paid, you probably want to play center. And I think he's just going to try his luck with some other team that wants to play him at center. The Dolphins made a 3-year investment to Aaron Brewer. I just don't see it happening. I guess if it comes down to it and he's not signed and Aaron Brewer gets hurt and the Dolphins now have all this cap space because of the Tua deal, I guess they could reconsider it and go back to him, but I just don't see it happening.
Mike Oliva making a case in the chat for the Dolphins to bring back Dan Feeney. And I want to reiterate that this is a pro Dan Feeney podcast. But, talk about break glass in case of emergency.
I'd be all for it.
Let's go. Bring back Dwight Stevenson.
But the offensive line in general, I don't know. I think they're going to wait until
one of
they
the
have
biggest question marks that the Dolphins have going into this season is that offensive line.
I think that they're going to go into the joint practices to see how it looks, maybe play a preseason game or two. Van Roten is still out there. They could bring in somebody off the street that I think would come in and be an upgrade over everybody that they have at guard. Potentially even Isaiah Wynn, but certainly over Driscoll and Eichenberg. But at this point, they've chosen not to do it. And I think that speaks volumes to what they think that they have.
Right.
I don't know that they're right. This is not a team that's got a great track record of being right about what they have on the offensive line, but it worked out last year, for the most part, when healthy. The question is, when Teron Armstead gets hurt, when Isaiah Wynn gets hurt, because those guys stay getting hurt, can you count on, Kendall Lamb and Austin Jackson being your two starting tackles? Can you count on Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones, Jack Driscoll, some combination of those three guys being your two starting guards? And can you make this offense work? It remains to be seen. But the fact that they have the cap space to do something and that they haven't done anything, I think speaks volumes.
Yeah, listen, Chris Greer has told us for a long time that he does not value offensive line in the same way that other people value the offensive line play. Because if he did, we wouldn't be looking at the players that we're looking at on our offensive line. That being said, because of how this offense works, you really just need them to be, replacement level. And if they can function at that level, then you're going to be okay. So, like I said, it remains it's one of the big question marks going into the season. It's not just the offensive line, it's the depth at offensive line. And can they maintain? Can they just do enough so that this offense can function?
I guess Greg Van Roten signed a couple days ago with the New York Giants, so he's not there anymore.
So there you go. So he's even off the table. So Dan Feeney lives.
So
Keep an eye out.
at this point, I mean, unless you're making a trade, I think that was the only guy that was out there in free agency that was a clear upgrade over what you had. So I mean, so at this point, look, it's the Eichenberg, Jones, and Driscoll show.
Jesus.
And maybe Keon Smith. They gave him some run at guard in the first week of training camp. I don't know. Some of the reports say that it maybe didn't go so great, so he's probably still a tackle. So I don't know if that's going to work.
Well, we've also heard some encouraging signs about the Dolphins' rookie offensive tackle Patrick Paul performing decently in camp, at least looking good with his size, and doing a lot of the things that you would expect him to do with a guy at his size. But we also know that the Dolphins based on the hints and whispers that we've heard, it seems like the Dolphins' plan is really to redshirt Patrick Paul, and they hope that they don't have to trot him out there for first team reps that much during the regular season.
Yeah, well, the issue with Patrick Paul is that, yeah, he's huge and he's athletic. And so there's going to be times where he has great reps just simply because of his size and his athleticism. Yeah. But he's also, if you put this guy out there today, or if you put this guy out there week 1 against, a legitimate pass rusher, I know what Josh Allen isn't going by. Was it Josh Allen Hines or something now?
Whatever, right? The guy from the Jaguars.
Yeah. If you put him up against the Jaguars and you started him, this guy's getting beat for 3 sacks in week 1 easily, because the hand technique is not there. This guy needs work. He's a project. So Patrick Paul is going to be a guy that I'm excited to see. Okay, they get down near the goal line, they put or you have these short yardage situations, you put an extra offensive lineman in there. That's what I want to see out of Patrick Paul. Aside from that, I don't want Patrick Paul in my starting lineup or in my lineup at all year 1, unless he's absolutely blowing them away at practice.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say real quick, because a lot of people talk about players as projects. We're all a project. Just to paraphrase the great Keith Olbermann, we're all day to day.
It's true. It's true.
So
we could all get better.
That's right. Everything is a project. This whole thing is a project. We're always being proven, baby. Always getting better. In the immortal words of one of my late college professors, getting better all the time. Got to be getting better all the time. So, Brain, what else from training camp? I mean, the good news is there's not that much stuff. It's all looking pretty good at this point in time. What about Skylar Thompson reportedly outplaying Mike White?
Not surprising. I thought Skylar Thompson was outplaying Mike White last training camp.
But this is the Mike White thing, is to tank in training camp.
Well, I think the reality of the situation is that they're backup quarterbacks. The news is that when Tua isn't out there, the backup quarterback, the quarterback play has been really poor. It's been below average. And that's,
what that tells you? It tells you that Tua deserved his money.
Absolutely.
So there you go. I think, Brain, I mean, I don't know.
You want to talk about I want to talk about the defense a little bit.
Let's talk about the defense.
Yeah. I think the edge rushers, the edge group has been.
Actually, before we do this, Brain, we got to pay some bills here real quick. Can we pay a bill real quick?
Yeah.
Here's a word from our sponsor. The DolphinsTalk.com podcast network is sponsored by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive, Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship it to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's caneswear.com. Caneswear.com. It's so weird to be like, here's a word from our sponsor, and then it's me. I'm talking more. It's very strange, very unusual, a very weird feeling. Shout out to Finsanity in the chat. Shout out Jeremy Morgan in the chat. Richard Keys in the chat. Brad Keel in the chat. Cap for Life. Shake Money. 90 MFC. Shout out to all the friends out in the chat today. Good to see everybody out and about for the preseason. It's a kind of laid back show. We're kind of shooting from the hip tonight because it's easy breezy right now, preseason, right? To respond to Cap for Life's question here, do we keep 3 quarterbacks? We will have 2 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster, and then we will have another quarterback on the practice squad because there is no limit to how many times that quarterback can be elevated on game day. So they don't need to have 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. So I would imagine when all is said and done, you're going to have Tua Tagovailoa and Mike White as your roster quarterbacks, and Skyler's going to be your practice squad guy.
Maybe. I mean, logic would dictate that, but if Skylar Thompson really blows it out of the water and it's clear is the better player, then you save a lot of money if you move on from Mike White.
Yeah, fair enough. But I think the fact that Gavin Hardison was such a disaster.
But if Skylar White outplays Mike White,
Skylar White is an entirely different universe.
We're in the Breaking Bad universe. This
is not the same old Breaking Bad show.
Yeah.
What a drop. What a Freudian slip.
If Skylar Thompson,
Skylar White is outplaying Mike White, we got real problems.
Yeah. If Skylar Thompson outplays Mike White, then I don't think you're going to be able to stash Skylar Thompson on the practice squad. That becomes the issue. So I think you're probably right. I think we're probably putting way too much time into deciding it, but I would say that there's a competition there. I don't think Mike White is just guaranteed the number 2 spot if Skylar Thompson goes out and beats him. But getting back to where I was saying about the defensive side of the ball, I think, look, a lot was made out of, Shaq Barrett's retirement and how that was going to impact the Dolphins defense. And we sat here on this show. You asked me, how is this Dolphins edge group prepared to go into the season without Jalen Phillips and without Bradley Chubb and now with no Shaq Barrett? And my answer was they're not. And I still stand by that. I think if Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are not ready for the start of the season, I think you're going to feel that at the start of the season. That said, they brought in Emmanuel Ogbah. Ogbah has supposedly looked good. They're running things on defense with a little bit more diversity. And the word is there are some looks and some schemes that are similar to what they were running when Josh Boyer and Brian Flores were running the show, which is when Emmanuel Ogbah had his best seasons. So I think Emmanuel Ogbah could be a little bit of a saving grace. Chop Robinson has, by all accounts, looked the part at being an elite pass rusher, and it's really going to be exciting to see him out there. They're saying his first step quickness is just, it jumps off the page. Like you can't watch practice and not be impressed by just how explosive he is. But time will tell as far as whether he can be an every down guy. Haven't heard much about Muhammad Kamara. The guy that's been surprisingly talked a lot about as far as an edge rusher is Quentin Bell. And that's an interesting development, that there's another guy there that could potentially be pushing to make this roster from that edge group. And look, they need all the help they can get at that position until Phillips and Chubb are ready. So Quentin Bell, I think, is a really interesting development.
Sounds like Channing Tindall has had a couple of flashes in training camp as well. Nothing extensive, but it's one of those. He's one of those guys, man. If you can get anything out of Channing Tindall at this point, it's something. At least it's like that's a bonus, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, Channing Tindall's in the now or never stage at this point.
He's kind of like in that Austin Jackson phase where you just thought you were going to have something here, but maybe you're not going to have something. But then miraculously turns it all around. He did the hokey pokey and he turned himself around.
Well, it could go the way of Austin Jackson and it could go the way of Noah Igbenogany. That's the thing. You don't know. I think it's trending more towards going the way of Noah Igbenogany because of the competition that was brought in. And the guys that he would have to beat out. He'd have to beat out Cam Brown. He'd have to beat out Anthony Walker Jr. But if he does it, then the linebacker group is looking really good. And then I think corner is the other place where we could probably end on. Cam Smith, speaking of Noah Igbenogany.
Boy, he is on the trajectory.
Now, granted, cannot be blamed for injury, and this injury does not look like it is going to keep him out very long, according to Mike McDaniel. So we'll just kind of keep it day to day. But I think it's interesting that Kader Kohu's been playing really well and has been making waves at camp. And every time somebody asks about the cornerback group, a player is bringing up Ethan Bonner. And so, and even Saron Neal, who was brought in to be mostly a special teams contributor, has been making plays. So Cam Smith is losing some vital reps, and guys that he was foreseen to be above on the depth chart may be passing him on said depth chart, which ultimately is good for the depth of the roster, but may not be great for Cam Smith.
A question that came in from Mason at twitter.com. currently known as X. Do you have enough interior D linemen? To me, DT and CB are potential positions of concern. Yeah, I mean that is one of the big questions. I said on one side, the two big questions, I think, at least where the two areas where I think the Dolphins actively got worse this year. One is on the offensive line, and the other is quite clearly at defensive tackle. And what is the combination of players like that is going to make up for what you've lost in Christian Wilkins? Can you get a combination of play from the variety of players that came in to fill that role opposite Zach Sealer? Can you get enough quality so that there is not a huge drop off? And that remains to be seen for me.
Well, I think that, look, you're not going to get the same ceiling because Christian Wilkins was a guy that played, like 80% of your defensive snaps and played it at an extremely high level. I think you mitigate that a lot by bringing in Calais Campbell, who, is there a drop-off from Christian Wilkins to late-stage Calais Campbell? Yes.
Late stage Calais Campbell needs to be his nickname. That's it. I'm putting it to late stage Calais Campbell. That's what he's called now. Please only refer to him as late stage Calais Campbell. Late stage
Calais Campbell would still have been the third best defensive tackle on the Miami Dolphins last season. And I got news for you. Benito Jones, he probably would have been the third best defensive tackle on the Dolphins last season.
Does he have a chance to be the second best Benito in professional South Florida sports history?
I think he's already the second best Benito because I can't think of a second other than Benito Santiago.
Yeah, he's the greatest. He's the greatest Benito in South Florida professional sports history.
I cannot think of another Benito.
I feel like that's a fairly deep cut in 2024.
Doing it with the J-Ro Quiche, was J-Ro Quiche the announcer or was?
Yeah, no, he did the PA, right?
Yeah.
In the stadium. Benito Santiago.
Yeah.
That's a shout out to any of the old school South Florida people.
Canes fans, Marlins fans. because he did it for the Canes too.
Yeah.
Benito Jones is a better nose tackle than Raekwon Davis. And then you also have that gaggle of guys, whether it's Gallimore or Tart or Jonathan Harris or Mack. I think there's enough guys there. And you still brought back Hand, that I think you've raised the floor of that room. So I think you have more depth at defensive tackle than you had last season. It's just, obviously you're missing Christian Wilkins, but I'm not super concerned about the depth at defensive tackle because I think they have NFL rosterable players at interior of defense, on the interior of the defensive line. I think interior O-line, that's a whole other issue. That's a whole other ball of wax because you could be starting multiple guys that probably should not be starting. That's not the deal on the defensive side on the interior. And then he also made the point of corner. I think our cornerback depth is pretty good. The fact that Kader Kohu is playing, and granted it's practice, and Kader Kohu did not have a good year last year.
Practice.
We did have a very good rookie year. And if we are playing a little bit more, of the reps where he's going to be playing a little bit more man coverage and not playing predominantly zone, maybe Kader Kohu does have a bounce back year. And then, you brought in Kendall Fuller. I think, at the very least is a lateral move from X. Some people would say it's an upgrade over what you've gotten out of X the last 2 years. And then I think, between Saron Neal, Ethan Bonner, Cam Smith, you've got enough there. And then you've got Jalen Ramsey is going to be moving around. And you've got Jordan Poyer back there. You've got May back there at safety. I just think it's a deeper secondary. It's a deeper roster altogether. And it's one of the reasons why I think this team may be being slept on by a lot of people in the national media who just look at it and say, hey, the Dolphins lost a ton in free agency, especially with Robert Hunt and with Christian Wilkins. I think the Dolphins have equipped themselves really well by making themselves a deeper roster. Are they going to miss the having Robert Hunt on the interior offensive line and Christian Wilkins on the interior defensive line? Absolutely. But I think they've made up for it pretty well in other areas.
Yeah, I think it's important to couch all of this in the fact that these are practices. This is not competitive yet. No matter how spicy things might get on the practice field from time to time, it's still a practice and it's not real. We're going to start to see real a little bit next week when the Dolphins have some joint practices with the Atlanta Falcons, and then you get that preseason game, and then you can really start to, I think, in a more competitive environment, start to figure out some things a little more deeply. But right now, as you're hearing things in practice, it is what it is. You got to take everything that you hear with a little bit of a grain of salt there. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to basically wrap up this episode of Same Old Dolphins Show because I feel like we've had a good time talking here. Next week we'll be back. We'll talk a little joint practice with the Atlanta Falcons. We'll look ahead to the preseason game. But I also want to say this. We're going to be making an announcement early next week at DolphinsTalk.com. We got an announcement coming your way. This is called a tease. We're going to be making a little announcement on Monday. We talked about previously how you might be hearing some more from the brain and me. And well, just stay tuned. You're going to hear a little announcement coming up real soon. In the meantime, make sure that you smash the like button on this video. You share it, send it to your friends. If you don't like what we're talking about, send it to your enemies. Just make sure you send it to somebody. Leave us a comment, leave us a 5-star rating, leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it. Make sure you're visiting DolphinsTalk.com each and every day. It's your one-stop shop for all things Miami Dolphins. And yeah, we'll be back early next week with some news for you. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
I wonder what kind of bagel Skylar White would be.